or higher on fixed rate mortgages. They're opting for the teaser rate, right? They want that teaser rate. We've got a massive adjustable rate mortgage on the national debt. Well, what's going to happen when foreigners don't want to roll over this debt? Rates have to go up. They can go up dramatically. Rates can go to 5%, 10%, 15%. And then what are we going to do? How is the government going to afford to make interest payments on the national debt when rates go up? And imagine the economy. Think about all the people who are unemployed now. Imagine how many more people will be unemployed when rates are at 10% or 15%. What kind of tax revenue is the federal government going to collect? So not only are their bills going to go up, it could cost the federal government $1.5–2 trillion a year in interest payments on the national debt. That can exceed their tax revenues. I mean, they might not even get $2 trillion in taxes, which means 100% of federal income taxes are going to have to go to interest on the national debt. And who holds that? China, Japan, Saudi Arabia. Man, we can't survive in that situation. That is the fiscal train wreck that we're coming to. And what I think is going to happen, instead of dealing with it in an honest way, they're just going to print money. Right? Ben Bernanke is going to print money. He's going to create Federal Reserve notes out of thin air to buy up all that debt that the Chinese are unloading and that the Japanese are unloading so they can keep financing this runaway government spending because no politicians in Washington have the guts to tell the public the truth and do what needs to be done. And when they do that, that's when we have the real crisis. Because the dollar is going to collapse, prices for consumer goods are going to go through the roof, interest rates are going to go through the roof, we'll have twice as many people unemployed as we have now, we're going to have a real serious recession, and the government's not going to be able to bail anybody out because the government's going to need a bailout, and there's no one big enough to do it. And when I make these forecasts, I got a pretty good track record for making forecasts. I mean, I was the main guy on television who was warning about the financial crisis in 2008. I wrote a book called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse that came out in February of 2007. And in that book, I detailed the problems of the U.S. economy. I said it was a house of cards that was about to collapse, that it was built on the foundation of a housing bubble, and that there were all these lax lending standards and artificially low interest rates that inflated this huge bubble, and that when it burst, which I thought would happen soon, it would bankrupt our entire financial system because I knew that the banks that were holding the mortgages would fail. I also predicted that Freddie and Fannie would go bankrupt. And I predicted that we would enter the greatest recession since the Great Depression with unemployment above 10%. Also in that book, I predicted that the government would do exactly what they're doing now. I said rather than allowing the recession to run its course, which unfortunately was necessary because of all the damage that had been done during the phony boom, I said the government would come in and stimulate the economy with cheap money, that they would try to reflate the bubble, that they would try to maintain overvalued home prices, and that was going to usher in the real financial crisis, which is the reason that I'm running, because I want to try to be in office to try to head that off. I want to try to prevent them from making the same mistakes a third time, because we can't afford it. They will completely destroy what's left of this economy. And I was on financial television for 3 years, from 2005 through mid-2008, warning about these problems. I mean, I was on every week. I was on CNN, I was on CNBC, I was on Fox, I was on Bloomberg, I did some network shows. I split around the country speaking to investment forums, to industry groups. I spoke in front of 3,000 mortgage bankers in 2005 and 2006 at their regional conference in Las Vegas. One of those speeches is on YouTube. If you have an extra hour one afternoon and you want to watch it, you can go Peter Schiff Mortgage Bankers and watch that presentation. But I warned everybody that I could that these problems were coming, and nobody listened to me. A lot of people actually laughed at this, and they said it was impossible. It can never happen, right? Well, almost all of it has happened, and no one is still listening to me. I mean, I still can't get anyone in Congress to pay attention to what I have to say. They had a hearing recently on trying to figure out why we had a financial crisis, right? And I'm like, well, I know why we had a financial crisis. I wrote a book about it. So I'm contacting Washington, I email or calling them up. Can I be a witness at this hearing? Right? Who knows how much of our tax dollars they're wasting on these hearings? They could have spent $16 on Amazon and bought my book. They would know exactly why there was a financial crisis. And I wanted to go there and testify. They won't have me there. Meanwhile, I spoke at an economic conference in Saudi Arabia, and they paid me a lot of money to go there. I spoke in Poland. I stand on the same podium as the Nobel Prize winner in economics to discuss why we had a financial crisis. They knew to invite me in Poland, right? Because they found me. If you go to YouTube and you put in financial crisis, I'm on the first page, right? I'm all over the internet. If you type in financial crisis, economic collapse, you think somebody in Washington could have figured that out? Now, I would have taken the train for free down to Washington, D.C. and testified. So it seems to me that no one in Washington is going to do the right thing. No one even cares what the right thing is. The only way I'm going to get my ideas into Washington is if I go there, right? They're not going to invite me to their party. I got to crash it. And that's what I'm trying to do by running for the United States Senate. I mean, I'm not a politician. I've never sought elected office, and I might never seek elected office again if I get this one term, which is what I want. 1 6-year term in the United States Senate. That's all I need. I think that's all we got. I don't think the country can survive another 6 years unless we do the right thing. And we need people in office who are not there because they want to be there. They're there because they feel they have to be there. Because the decisions that we need to make as a nation to prevent this country from going off the edge of a cliff, you can't make them by consulting a pollster. You have to be willing to do what's right regardless of the outcome of the polls. And I'm hoping that I can go to Washington and convince the other 99 senators, or actually I don't need 99, I just need 40. If I can just get 40 senators to do the right thing and to put their country above their own political aspirations and their own career and do the right thing, then we can make a real change. Because I mentioned earlier that we just raised the debt ceiling from 12 trillion to 14 trillion. Well, if I could just find enough senators to join me in the filibuster and stop that debt ceiling from being raised, we win. Because they can't spend if they can't borrow. If we shut the borrowing down, they have no choice. They can't raise taxes because they have to pass a tax increase. And if I have enough votes to block the increase in the debt ceiling, then I have enough votes to block the passage of a tax hike. So they'll have no choice. They'll have to cut spending. They'll have to slash spending, and they'll have to do it right now. So I think as the people who are running for the Senate right now, I'm the only person who has the real understanding of economics and a track record of making accurate economic predictions for the last 10 years. And it's all in print. It's in my books. It's all over the internet. It's all over television. It's all over YouTube. It's there. Meanwhile, people like Ben Bernanke or Timothy Geithner or Henry Paulson, the people that everybody is listening to, as many things as I've gotten right, that's how often they've been wrong. And all that is public record. You can see it all. So it shouldn't be that difficult for me to convince people to stop following people who have never been right. And that maybe since I've gotten a lot of things right that I know what I'm talking about. But in addition to understanding economics, I do understand business. I run a business. I'm an entrepreneur. I started my own business myself. I started in my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles. Before that, I worked at Lehman Brothers for a while, a major firm. I worked briefly at Drexel Burnham, but they basically closed down. Before I even started. They hired me, but then they went broke before I started working. So I went to Lehman Brothers, and it took them longer to go broke. That finally happened. But I didn't like it, and I went on my own. I started my own in a one-bedroom apartment. I had no employees. Even as late as 2000, I didn't have a single employee. And when I started my business, I knew there was a NASDAQ. The NASDAQ bubble is what got me started, because I saw the tech bubble, and I was warning anybody who would listen that the internet was going to collapse. I was cold calling, 16 hours a day. I was on the phone trying to convince people to sell their internet stocks. And it wasn't an easy thing to do, because nobody wanted to sell them. Meanwhile, all my friends were making a lot more money than I was, because they were giving the public what they wanted. In order to make a lot of money as a stockbroker in the 1990s, all you had to do was tout an internet stock, and the public ate it up. I didn't want to do that because I knew these things would crash. So instead of giving my clients or my prospects what they wanted, I tried to explain to them what they needed, and that was much more difficult. But in the end, that helped me because I got a lot of credibility, and I built a real business based on that foresight. And now, 10 years later, I have over 100 employees. I got brokers working for me in 6 offices around the country. I'm headquartered in Westport. But I understand how to build a business. I understand where jobs come from because I've created them. And I understand where jobs don't come from. I understand what government does. I understand all the roadblocks that governments put in our way that prevent businesses from creating jobs. I know that because I'm encountering those roadblocks myself. The biggest barrier to me hiring more people in the state of Connecticut right now is government regulation. That's preventing me from doing that. So I understand the lunacy of these regulations, and that the only way that we're ever going to grow as a nation again is to the extent that we can shrink the government in every single facet. We need to make it smaller because it has to spend less, but we also have to repeal all these rules and regulations that do nothing but artificially increase the cost of doing business and retard real economic growth and destroy jobs. And people try to say, oh, we can't deregulate because deregulation was why we had this financial crisis. That's not why we had it. The financial industry is the most heavily regulated industry in the country.